We are live.
This is Literary Roadhouse, one short story once a week. I'm Gerald.
I'm Rami.
I'm Anais.
And I'm Maya. And before we get started, I want to remind everybody that we're going to start a new podcast coming January. Look forward to the Bradbury Challenge, where me, Gerald, and a newcomer, Chrissy Moss, will be challenging ourselves to write one short story each week during the year 2016.
I still think you guys are crazy. I'm just going to keep reading. So I already finished reading The Heart Goes Last by Margaret Atwood, and I can't wait to discuss it with you guys in January. Our listeners should join us once a month in 2016 as we discuss full-length novels on our new show, the Literary Roadhouse Book Club. And now we can go on with today's discussion, and we may or may not swear. So check out the explicit rating or not in the show notes.
And if you haven't read Arrangements by Charles Watts, which is today's story, and don't want to be spoiled, pause the podcast, read the story, and then come back. This story, which won first prize in our favourite Carve magazine's Raymond Carver competition, is a two-person vignette between a flower seller in her shop and a male client. We'll read their rather stilted conversations, but by alternating the point of view, the author cleverly also shows what's going inside their minds, as they both make assumptions about the opposite character based purely on their appearance.
Okay, let's start with just top level. How did everybody feel about the story?
I liked it.
Same here.
Oh.
Well then, me too. So here we go.
Great. You know what? I started off not liking it, and gradually I began to like it, but I did not start off liking it. So, I mean, I hate it when everybody likes the story. It makes it so difficult, you know? So let's just talk a little bit about what you guys liked about the story. What was, like, your favorite thing about the story?
I liked its, you know me, I like simple stories. I like simple writing, but done well. So I love the alternating point of view from this, and I love the rhythm of the description followed by a short piece of dialogue at the end before it switches point of view. So I love that about it, and I love the assumptions that they were making about the other person and sort of writing their own backstory to the other person's lives. So that was I found that very sort of interesting technique, and yeah, and that's it.
Okay, I guess I'll go next. Yeah, I liked everything that Gerald just mentioned, and I also liked the way that the stories changed and started to reflect back on their own lives as the story continued. I thought that arc was really interesting, and they had a similar parallel. Like, here they are knowing nothing about the other person, but they're both making up stories, and they're both making up stories in the same way and for the same reasons, which I thought was really cleverly done.
Yeah. How about you, Rami?
Yeah, I also thought it was very great writing. It felt like I was reading a poem. It was very beautiful imagery, flowery sort of language, and yeah, I enjoyed it.
I don't get y'all. I just don't get it. I don't get it. Okay, first, disclosure, I actually submitted to this contest, and this was the one I told you guys about where I had like the major fail, and I sent them my story with track changes on. Like, total newbie submission fail. It was like, oh shit, well, I'm not winning that contest. So, that disclosure. But I was really interested in reading the story to see what kind of story would win that contest, because I have ulterior motives here. And as I was reading it, I was not captured by the story until almost halfway through the story. The entire first half of the story, I really struggled with it. What I liked about it was in the second half of the story, I liked the evolution of the characters, and I liked how they changed and how I was finally able to get a little bit more depth of them through how they were describing one another. But I had some significant problems with the story. Am I the only one that had significant problems with the story?
Well, let's hear what the problems are.
Well, I felt like the first half of the story was not as strong as the second half of the story. I felt like the alternating viewpoints were great, but they were so close together that at no time during the first half of the story was I really able to latch on or understand the characters. And it left me kind of just on wishy-washy ground until right around the halfway point. And right around there, I felt like something shifted in the way the characters were thinking or maybe the way they were speaking, and it allowed me to latch onto them a little more closely. But that entire first half, there were multiple times where just as I was starting to understand a character, just as I was starting to have my interest peaked, it would change on me. And so I wasn't able to maintain my interest.
Okay.
No, I thought that was a deliberate technique in a way that the characters were deliberately sort of shallow and oversimplified, and the stories surrounding them were were not that real, were sort of quite bizarre. But then as the whole story progressed, I think we got to learn more about them through the characters. So the characters learned more about them, the other person, and which let us into the story a little more. So I wonder whether that was a deliberate technique to keep it sort of superficial at the start and then allow the depth to grow.
Yeah, and also, so the first time I read it, I had a similar experience to my, maybe not the first half, but the first quarter. I wasn't exactly gripped right away. But then I noticed that my second read through, that first quarter, that the first time didn't quite grip me. The second time, I'm like, oh, how clever, because he has these little like foreshadowing things, like when the man sees her tattoo for the first time, he says it was either the head of a cougar or motor gears that didn't mesh. Either way, it looked like a shape that was about to change. And I'm like, oh, that's great foreshadowing, because the tattoo does change. It doesn't actually literally change, but it changes in his interpretation of it as he keeps making up this story about her and revising it.
Yeah, I do think it was deliberate. I just think it was, I think it could have been done a little more skillfully. I think if each one of the segments had been a tad bit longer, I wouldn't have felt so jolted during that first read through. And it was definitely a jolted feeling. There were a couple times where I reread a paragraph because I was lost. There were a couple sentences that I reread because I wasn't entirely certain what was going on. But I felt like, by the halfway point, the story had definitely come into its own. It was making me like it despite myself, which was all good things.
Yeah, personally, I feel like the criticism you brought up, I felt was one of the story's strengths. Because yes, I do believe it was deliberate also, and I think it was trying to demonstrate how people's minds work. As they're exposed to new information, their assumptions change. Now, I don't think I don't think at least, yeah, that everyone has such poetic inner thoughts, but just with every new bit of information, then, like Anais said, they have to revise what they think of one another. And I thought for the most part it was pretty accurate, like how people assume things and how first impressions and all that.
Yeah. I have a question because I had very definite visuals of these people, and at one point one of my visuals was shown wrong. But what did you guys picture of these people, and where do you guys picture it taking place? I'm just very curious to see how well the author captured that, because to me, the place and location was very obvious by the way they spoke and by the way they saw one another, and I'm just curious if anybody else saw the same thing I saw.
Yeah, I definitely saw the flower shop. I've on an occasion in the past I've been into flower shops, and so I have a good sort of mental image of what the typical flower shop looks like. But strangely, I didn't picture the people at all, and the reference to the blue trousers of the guy, so I didn't really try and sort of fill in the rest of the person. It's sort of kind of strange. I don't know. Yeah. That's an interesting question. Yeah, it is an interesting question.
How about you, Anais?
Yeah, so at first, I picture the guy as like a super hipster, because she describes him as a hipster, kind of like Williamsburg type, even though because I know the author, I think he's based out of Massachusetts, it could be like whatever the Williamsburg equivalent is up there. But, definitely like some like hipster enclave. And the woman, I think at first I defaulted to like, because she had like cut off denim shirt and stuff, so I pictured her as like this like white lady with like short hair. But then when she describes it dark skin, then I revised it and I'm like, okay, so I think she's probably black because she has dark buttery skin. But then later she thinks about prayer flags, which made me think like maybe like Nepalese. So she's some sort of, in my mind now, like dark skin minority. I don't know exactly what because he doesn't really go into it, but which made the fact that he thinks she's in like an interracial lesbian relationship so hipster, like it crystallizes even more his hipsterness. So yeah, that's kind of how I pictured them.
How about you, Rami? I was just so curious.
So I didn't really think too much about race. I assumed the guy was white. The girl, I thought she could also possibly be like white but tanned or something like that. And I didn't like when I envisioned it, I just saw bodies. I didn't really put faces to it. So I just saw, the guy digging his hands in his pockets and the actions and the postures. And yeah, I feel like it was very well delineated imagery.
That is so interesting. To me, I totally pictured like the young but still uppity part of Oakland where, and those little flower shops up there, and I pictured him as being a person of color, and I definitely pictured her as white by the way she related to him. There was something in the way that she was relating to him that made me think she was white. It wasn't just a default reaction. So that when later on she was described as having dark skin, it actually jolted me out of the story, and I had to go back and reread that section because she was not relating to him the way that white women relate to him. Like the way she was picturing him, the things that were coming into her mind when she first meets him were not things that I would attribute to a woman of color. And so it totally jolted me. But I think that's really funny because it sounds like we were kind of on the same page. Like it seems like he had a really definite visual when it came to these characters, and he never really fleshed them out, and the fact that we were all kind of in the same vein is pretty interesting.
So the other thing that I liked on my second read through is now having had a little more time with the character after the first, now I'm playing guessing games. And I'm making up stories and like correcting them in my mind. So at first when she's like, oh, he must be not like 3 or 4 sections in, she's like, oh, he must be grieving. I'm like, nah, he's just anxious. He's just an anxious person. He's like rubbing his thigh and he's like assessing the threat level, and she's like seeing into some grief. And also when he sees the cigarette burn on her shoulder and like makes this whole thing up about how like she and her lover made some kind of self-harm pact, I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's a vaccination scar. Like I'm already
I love you, Anais. Yeah, smallpox, anybody?
Yeah, I'm like smallpox, TB. But I'm saying it with the same self-assuredness because as the story progresses, they keep using more words like definitely, has to be. I'm like, okay, guys.
You know what's funny is since I am a writer, this is how I move through the world. Like if I'm at the grocery store and I'm behind somebody, these are the types of things that are making up in my head based on their body language and the way they look and stuff. It's kind of like I felt kind of embarrassed reading this. I'm like, I know those people and I'm one of them. I suck.
Yeah, totally. Always. You see any characters, and if you come into a situation where you're in the company of one particular character, you're so building a backstory for them all the time.
You know what I love is when I can tell a couple are like on their first date, because you can tell by the body language. There's something about the body language. They're like overly interested in each other, but still reserved and really hopeful and cute about it. And I just love to sit back and watch first dates. and just make up like their future in my head. It's just wow. Writers are weird.
Yeah. Shouldn't be let out, really, should we?
I think that's fun. It makes going to the grocery store more interesting.
Maybe that's why I like shopping so much. Just all these people.
As long as you don't start talking to yourself, you can pass, Gerald. That's what I've learned.
Well, that's a bit frowned on, is it?
Yes, yes. You can't talk to yourself, even if you are in character. So, tell me, it seems like everybody kind of liked this story, except for me. I'm kind of on the fence about it. Was there anything in particular that you wanted to bring to mind about the language?
Okay, like I said before, I really liked it. I felt it was very creative writing and similes and all that stuff. However, and I know we spoke about this, I think it was last week, with like curse words or like vulgarity and things like that, but I felt like, okay, embedded with all this beautiful language, okay, for example, I'll read this sentence. This woman felt to him like a newly made island coming up out of the sea, all steam and explosions until the rocks begin to cool.
Are you seeing euphemisms where there aren't any, Rami?
Wait. And then she says, and shit from birds. Like, that embedded in this beautiful language, like he just throws in shit from birds, like that. Like you're saying, the race thing jolted, the skin color jolted you. That kind of like took me back. It's like it just felt like it doesn't belong there.
Excrement from birds wouldn't belong there either.
I like the word poop because of the two O's.
I mean, it's not something like I don't know.
But it's interesting that jolted you out. Like that's not something that like I didn't even notice.
Because it doesn't seem to fit like for me at least, the poetic nature of it. Like I don't know.
No, I know what Rami's saying, and yeah, thinking back on it, it did jolt me out of the story a little bit. It just didn't seem to fit, which was sort of kind of strange. But I sort of forgave him and
yeah. It's not like a big critique, but it's just
I considered it more like punctuation in that particular sentence, you know, because it was all flowery and then it was like a punctuated, sharp statement. And I like it when language does that. I don't like something that's just flowery and stays flowery. I like that intersperse and the play between the types of language and the feel of language. I think it's interesting. And so that didn't bother me. One of the things that I liked a lot, you know, there were certain moments where I'd be reading and I'm like, yeah, this is okay. And then all of a sudden there'd be a sentence that I'd be like, ooh, this is really interesting. And one of the sentences that I really liked was, it was not that she couldn't feel things. She was very emotional, in fact. But she could be looking at you and talking to you, and your hair might catch fire from dinner candles, and she would be thinking about what might have happened and what are the cultural norms relative to baldness and wigs and burn victims, instead of thinking, oh shit, what the hell? Here's a wet napkin. Are you okay? I know this woman. I know his wife. I've met her at dinner parties, and she's a fascinating woman. And you look at her and you're like, you are interesting. You are not of this world. You are really intelligent and really in your own head. And there was something really nice about the way, because the way he describes his wife, like you can tell like he's hurt by the fact they haven't had kids, but there's a respect there that like he's proud of how intelligent she is, and I could tell that just in his description of her, and I liked how she was described, and it really it cemented how I saw them. Like I originally when I pictured him as dark skin, maybe from Silicon Valley or you know, like in bio or whatever, you know, Middle Eastern. And when he starts describing his wife, like all the women I've met that are like that, they're all like super smart, went to Stanford, like those types of women. And it was like, ooh, I know this couple. They're interesting. I really liked that a lot. I liked how in those small glimpses, the characterization really shone for me.
Yeah, and just sort of looking again now, it could almost be a sort of Hispanic, couldn't he? And the fact that the writer puts that mentions piñata and beating with the bat and seeing strips from Spanish language newspapers, and I wonder whether the authors try to sort of give us clues there to the
That whole
origins
exchange made me think he was dark skinned and probably anything but Hispanic, and she was definitely white.
Okay.
Am I the only one that thought that when I read that? It was like, yeah.
When I first saw piñata and shredded Spanish newspaper, first, that was a sentence that jolted me because I was like, why isn't there candy? That's the whole point of it. But then,
where's the candy?
Yeah, so from the very, very first snapshot, I thought that he was like an older, like a middle-aged Latin guy. Like I wasn't quite sure. But then when she revises it and she's like, no, he's a Russian egg. I'm like, I feel like that's purposeful to like not make his race that important. But also, I didn't see the big difference between an empty piñata and an empty Russian egg. Colorful on the outside, hollow on the inside. Which, okay, got it. But one thing I did notice was in the beginning, they're both like critical of each other. He's empty and she's angry. By the end of it, it's like almost idolatry as they like pin on each other the things they wish their partner had, right? Which I thought was great. Like, yeah.
Remy?
Yeah,
Oh, I thought you were going to speak.
No, you started to say something and I stopped.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's interesting because until you mentioned the whole like Latin association with piñata, that didn't even like click for me. I just felt like it was a description of someone wearing bright clothes. I didn't associate it with one race or another.
How about you, Gerald?
Yeah, it's only, as I say, I didn't really go to any great lengths to try and fill in the images of these people. I think at one stage one of them refers to the other one as being the same age as them in their mid-30s. So they're pretty similar in that respect. But yeah, as I say, I wasn't that hung up on their sort of physical appearance or anything. It was just interesting to see, and also interesting was the fact that the paragraphs got longer towards the end. As the story progressed, as we learn more about them, and as the detail increased of the characters, then the paragraphs got longer and longer and longer. And again, I think that's quite a clever technique because they're now looking in more detail at each other and thinking about the other person in more detail. So, and therefore it's less sort of staccato and she's angry and he's empty, and now they're more rounded characters and more interesting because of that.
I also think what the longer paragraphs did was it allowed the author's writing to shine. I felt like in the beginning it was so staccato that I was losing a lot of it. And that's what I meant when I said I wished in the beginning the sections had been just a little bit longer, not like significantly longer, because I liked how it got longer as the story went on. But if it had been a hair longer, I felt like it would have kept my interest better and I would have gotten caught up with the author's language. Because in the beginning, I wasn't caught up with the characters yet because I don't know them. I wasn't caught up with the story yet because I didn't know what was going on. So the only thing really that I had left to hang my hat on was the author's language, and he was jumping around so much that wasn't catching me either. And I feel like if I would have had the opportunity to catch the writer's language earlier on, that this story would have gone like to a whole nother level, because there was some really interesting stuff that he was doing here in analyzing, in talking about how we relate to each other and how we relate to strangers and how we relate to others is really a mirror of ourselves. And it was done in a way that was fascinating. And so when I started reading, I was like, oh my goodness, I don't want to finish this. This is horrible. This is going to be a 2. Why did they make me read this? Gosh darn them. And then towards the end, I'm like, wow, this is really fascinating. I wish it had been done better, but I'm really caught up with the story. I'm really caught up with the ideas. I want to think about these ideas a little more. And so, yeah, that was very, it was frustrating, but also interesting that he managed to turn me around.
So I want to real quick also go back to, so what Maya was just talking about, that the interesting thing is how he examines how we look at each other. But I think it's not just how we look at each other, but he's pinpointing something, which is people who've been in relationships for a long time and start to see the flaws in their partner, start to like look at other people and imagining them as having it. And I like that he also disproves it. Like, not only are you seeing the way that they're like, my husband isn't like this guy's like this, my wife isn't nurturing, this woman's nurturing, but then you also kind of see like they're not really correct. He's not actually grieving for his wife. It's like some office related thing. And she has a daughter, but she doesn't sound like some great nurturer. So I thought that was interesting, especially since the woman, her thing about her husband, who was like, he's too happy, he hasn't been scratched in life. That's like something I think about like my boyfriend. I was like, I know what you mean, girl. Like, I don't want you to suffer, but also it might be helpful if you did at least once. Like,
that's like I said that guys need a couple of crow's feet because they look like dough. It's like you gotta get scratched up just a little bit.
Yeah.
I love you, Anais. I adore you so much. Yeah, I had a thought about what you just said, and I lost it because I was too busy giggling.
It's about people being dead wrong when they fantasize about strangers being everything that their partner lacks. That's basically it.
Of course. Oh, what I was going to say was, it kind of reminds me of that story we read a few weeks ago, where it was really about how when you're first in love and you're really young, you're not really in love with the person that you're in love with. You're in love with the vision of the person that you're in love with. I felt like this was the stranger version of that. Yes. Thank you, Rami, for having the excellent memory. I need you in my real life. You can just walk behind me and fill in the blank.
Really isn't that good.
But yeah, it kind of reminded me of that in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is there anything else you guys would like to bring up about this story before we get ready to rate it?
Well, I have a question for you, Maya, and you brought this up a couple of times about like the jumpy language, but don't you think people's minds sort of work that way in real life?
Yes, and that could have been portrayed in a less jumpy way. So my point is, you can portray the jumpiness of the human monkey mind, okay? Like, I'm all for that. Like, oh, squirrel, shiny, like, that's good. But the writing itself needed to be smoothed out a little bit so that me as a reader wasn't going, what the hell just happened? And having to go back and reread a paragraph because I think I missed something. That's what I was talking about. So the jumpy nature of the people, the jumpy nature of their thoughts, excellent. But for me, the jumpy nature of just how short the beginning paragraphs were led me to a state of rereading sections and not being sure of where I was and just getting frustrated and not feeling close to story. Like, literally, if I hadn't been part of the podcast, I probably wouldn't have gotten past the first couple paragraphs. I would have read a few and said, oh, this isn't for me, and gone down to something else.
And that's one of the things that attracted me to the story initially, was the fact that it changed point of view so quickly. So you find out a little bit about one person, then you switch and you find out a little bit about the next person, and then you switch again. So I quite like that. I think if there'd been long exposition about the one person.
Oh, I wouldn't have wanted that either. I'm literally like if this had been my story, if this had been my story and I was revising it, I would have just added just a couple sentences to each of the beginning paragraphs. It wouldn't have been like long sections. It was just, I would have eased that transition just a little bit, so it was still jumpy, but not so jumpy that I lost my reader. Because for me, as a reader, the first few was jumpy enough that he would have lost me if I hadn't had to come on the show and talk about it. And that would have been sad because I really liked the ideas of the story. The rest of the story, the second half of the story was fascinating. He was touching on some things that I think about but I haven't seen in this short story or anything really. And so like I would have missed out on all of that because the beginning was so jumpy.
Mm-hmm. As we've been talking, this is kind of like jumping back a little bit, something I realized as we've discussed the story is also the things that they imagine say a lot about their character. So like the woman, she's slightly earthier, and her stories, her fiction is grounded in reality more. She's picturing a funeral because he said he's going to a funeral, and the things that she adds on aren't so out there. His fiction is a little crazy. Like he sees one scar and he's got like a cigarette burn pact. And apropos of nothing, he's picturing them like adopting a baby. She's sketching a flower arrangement. He's like, oh, she probably drew her lover and then drew her lover in a way that upset her lover, so then they broke up. Like his fiction's just like, he's really stretching it. And he's the only one who keeps going to her death. Like she ends it at the funeral and he's there like, she's going to die at the age of 93 with her great-granddaughter holding her hand. I'm like, this guy. But it's funny.
It's me.
Yeah, but he's the one who's colorfully dressed. Like he's the one who's more like a little more out there, a little more expressive.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Almost all of the characterization that I got was through how they were imagining each other. Mm-hmm. There really wasn't any other characterization available. Mm-hmm. And that was done really interestingly. Like, you know, the fact that we all kind of had a similar idea of who these people were, even though there was like no description of character development outside of what they were imagining of each other, kind of said a lot to me.
Yeah, that's a very astute observation because this is actually a psychological phenomenon where your self-schemas determine how you view others.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. So are we ready to rate this puppy?
Yes.
Okay, everybody else go because I'm confused. I still don't know what the hell I'm going to rate it. I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that. It's too high. I don't want to do that. It's too low. Now it's changed because you guys made me like it more.
5.5.
Oh, it took the words out of my
jumped
mouth.
right in there.
Took the words right out of my mouth. I had 5.0 written in, and then I thought, no, damn it, there's very little wrong with this. So, yeah, 5.5 from me too.
I'm going to copy and paste what Gerald just said. I had written down 5, and then we had the discussion. I'm like, 5.5.
Wow.
Hey.
Wow. Yeah, I can't go that high. I started out with a 2, and then by the end of the story, I bumped it up to a 3, and then you guys made me feel like that 3 was a little more solid because I was starting to go back to a 2.5, and now I'm thinking I'm going to give it a 3.5.
Wow.
What? That's solid? That is a good review. Like, if freaking Shakespeare is number 6, like, come on here. Like, this is not Amazon. This is Goodreads.
I love Anais copying and pasting.
Yeah. No, I think it's Amazon. I think, you know what I mean? Okay, on the first read-through, I would agree with you. On the first read-through, a lot of it went over my head. I'm glad I gave it a second read-through because that's when I discovered how much I liked it. Yeah.
So the question is that a good thing or a bad thing? If you have to read a story 2 times in order to like it, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing?
Well, not in order to like it. I liked it after my first, but I think after my first would have been like 4, and it was the second read through that I said, okay, 5. There's more going on here.
And I think also we're doing this. This is a thing, you know, short stories and analysing and rating and stuff like that. So we have to give stories a second read through.
Yes, we have to. But what I'm saying is, if the difference between the first story and the second story isn't I liked it and here's more depth of why I liked it, but rather I hated it and now I like it,
Well, okay,
That's kind of like a big deal.
I guess I'm embarrassed to say this, but I've never read a story twice on this show.
And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that because most people in this world do not read stories twice. We're just overachievers and crazy because we're writers. You're a normal person. You are our control, Jeremy.
That's a big responsibility.
Although, I will say this though. I think sometimes for me at least, I don't want to put the burden on making me like something too much on the author, because I've also noticed if I read it at night or in the morning makes a big difference. If I read it fresh after my first cup of tea, I am so much more disposed to like everything. So my second read through was also fresh in the morning, and I was like, oh wow.
Have you guys noticed that I've gotten more critical since we switched to an early morning podcast? When we recorded news, I like stories so much more at noon than I do at 7 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah.
Well, this is like meta right now because like we're doing what the characters in this story were doing to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we're human.
Yeah, because the story really captured humanity well.
There you go. Just dig that in there, Anais.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, right in there.
There's the stories you've loved where I turn around and I'm like, nah. So that's how the podcast goes.
So I guess the point of this discussion is don't take anything we say at least don't take anything Maya says too seriously, because we're recording way too freaking early for me to like anything.
I feel like I should have a disclaimer, whether or not I read this first thing in the morning, because if I did, I'm going to like it. Well, I'm not going to like it, but I give it a bigger chance.
You have more energy to spare.
Yeah.
Oh man, that is too funny. Okay, so what are we putting into the pot for next week? I found this wonderful literary online magazine called World Literature Today. And I am fascinated with it. It has all these authors from places that I normally don't get to see, and translations, and I'm just like, ooh, there's so many interesting short stories. So I'm throwing in Turning 30 by Dela Ta'ai. And I'm sure I butchered that name. I'm really sorry. The translation is by Daniel Simon. Translator's name's a little easier, but I'll get there. It seems like a really fascinating story, and I'm going to win it because I want to read it this week.
Oh yeah.
Be nice, Gerald.
Rami, what do you want to put forward?
Okay, I'm going to break tradition here a bit, my own tradition. So
What, you didn't read this one?
Well, yes, and I'll tell you why. Since I actually had another story, but since you seem so passionate about reading this one, I'll also nominate the same story to double your chance of winning.
Oh my
Turn
goodness.
30.
Rami is
Let's
kind.
go for it.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. I'm putting
What that
in...
translates to is he forgot to pick a story this morning.
No, I really have one. I swear.
Okay.
You're assuming the worst. You are. Take a nap.
We're writers. We always assume the worst.
And I'm submitting Kudzu by Andrea Babotis. Babotis. It's second place in the 2015 Raymond Carver contest. So the story we just read for this show beat it out. So I'm curious to see now what's second place.
What does second place look like? Smart.
Very good. Okay, so I'm doing the quiz today, and
I'm going to win, of course.
All
Thank
about
you, Gerald.
flowers.
Oh,
no.
great.
Gotcha.
Okay, Rami's going to win, but hey, that's okay.
Why do you, every time you say that, I lose.
That's
I'm
her
just
why I
playing
say
good.
Well, I want Anais to win because we don't like people who game the system. So. Right.
I didn't tell him to do that.
No. Right. So just because I normally go left to right, I'll go right to left, and Rami's first. It's all about the blue rose. In the Victorian era language of flowers, a red rose means true love, a white rose, innocence or purity. What does a blue rose mean? And you've got three choices: icy disregard, mystery, or nothing because there is no blue rose.
Nothing.
It means mystery.
I was right. Yay.
Uh-huh. Okay. Next along. Oh, it's Maya. Purple poison. There is one pretty purple flower that does not belong in your salad. It's very poisonous. Which flower is it? Is it a lavender, a violet, or wisteria?
Wisteria.
Wisteria is correct. Tick. And Anais, the song in an English country garden, there you go, because your boyfriend's English, an English country garden celebrates the abundance of flowers to be found in those gardens. Among others, the song names roses, foxgloves, snowdrops, and which of the following? Forget-me-nots, honesty, or periwinkles?
Oh, what was the first list? Maybe they rhyme.
Forget-me-nots.
Wait,
First list. Roses, foxgloves, snowdrops.
and forget-me-nots.
Is correct. Woo. Okay. Round one over. Okay, back to Rami. The biggest flower, the largest individual flower in the world, and it's got a Latin name, which I won't even attempt, grows in the rainforests of Sumatra and Borneo. The common name is A. Blumenbertha, orangutan's umbrella, or stinking corpse flower.
Bertha.
Wrong. It is stinking corpse flower.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because it smells like death.
Yeah.
It's a giant stinky flower.
Okay, Maya. Look, don't touch. One lovely North American. You see, it's a multi-ethnic thing. One lovely North American wildflower goes by the common names of jewelweed and touch-me-not. It's called jewelweed because its blossom looks like hanging jewels. But why is it called touch-me-not? Is it causes an itchy rash, its seed pods explode on contact, or it dies if touched?
Itchy rash.
Wrong.
Oh, it
Seed
dies if
pods
touched.
No, its seed pods explode on contact.
Really?
Oh, yes. Okay, Anais, to take the lead. Make mine vanilla. Please. Make mine vanilla, please. Which flowering plant does the vanilla bean come from? Is it the crocus, the orchid, or the tea tree?
Oh, man. I don't know. They always have that little white flower picture. Is it an orchid? A certain type of orchid?
Indeed it is.
Oh my
Hooray,
goodness.
it's orchid. Okay, and final round. William. Dianthus is a pretty little flower with spicy scent, welcome in many gardens. One of its common names is Sweet William, but the Scots in Scotland call it Stinking Billy, Wee Willie Winky, or Bonnie Betty. This is to Rami.
Wee Willie Winky.
It's Stinking Billy, I'm afraid.
Oh for 3.
Oh, yes, right.
I love how Gerald says, "Oh dear." It just sounds so English. It's quite charming. Every once in a while I forget, and then you say something like, "Oh yeah, that's right. How charming."
Well, it's about flowers in England and stuff like that. Right, Linnaeus, this is to Maya. Linnaeus, the father of taxonomy, made careful observations of flowering plants and thus discovered a novel use for flowers. He showed that flowers can be used to find the points of the compass, say whether or not your friend loves you, or tell the time during the day.
Compass.
Tell the time during the day.
Oh
Because of which way
man.
they face, right? For the sun.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I almost said that, but I was thinking they lean north. I don't know why I was thinking that. Moss. Damn, Moss got me confused.
I'll ask the final question, although Anais has already won. Hey.
Of course she won, because even when my story is in twice, I can't win.
So, the final question. The world's smallest flower, Wolfia, is very hard to see, and not only because it's barely a millimetre across. What's the other reason? Is it the bloom is completely enclosed inside a host plant, the plant rarely flowers, or it grows only on rocky mountain peaks?
Inside a host plant, maybe?
No, it's rarely flowers.
Rarely flowers, okay.
Oh.
That was like too basic. No
I
way.
was thinking
up
Rocky
top.
Mountain. I was thinking like Everest or something.
Yeah, nothing grows up there. Except
Dead climbers? Is that what you were going to say?
yeah, I saw the movie Everest.
Rowdy climbers.
It's just, yeah.
Great.
So I thus declare that Anais is the winner, and we're going to be reading...
Second place.
We're going to be reading, yeah, but it's not called second place. It's called Kudzu by Andrea Bobotis. Bobotis? I don't know. I don't know what it is.
Whatever.
But before then, I just want listeners to know that although we've never met, I can see you so clearly, sitting there and thinking about the story. You have so much to say about it. You decide to go to literaryroadhouse.com and, with your fingers trembling over the keyboard, no wait, it's a touchscreen, definitely a touchscreen. You leave a brilliant comment. Then you realize you may as well also leave a review on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spreaker, then share this podcast with your friends. Until next time, read a good story.
You're brilliant, Annie. I love you.
Yeah.
It just doesn't get any better than her outros, right?